So welcome again. My name is Mark Annam, and our host this week is Kathy Harper, and from the Ohio State University in the Engineering Education Department, although she is a loyal physicist, even though she is in the Engineering Department. I checked, she still has her membership card. But tonight, we are really talking about culture and trying to build that all-important idea of classroom culture for our students, but in the particular challenge of how does that work in a distance model, or how does that work in a hybrid model of some students in person, some in distance. And clearly there's a challenge here that is new to us. And it's a distinct challenge that we haven't necessarily had to approach yet. You know, last spring, when all of us kind of very quickly jumped into distance learning, by that point in the semester, we had built a culture. We knew our students, we knew how they operated. And now potentially we're going to be starting off classes without that structure in place. So I hope tonight we can kind of delve into that topic as well as any others, so we have lots of time to talk. But at this point, I will turn it over to Kathy and let her help lead the discussion.
Hey everybody, I hope you're all doing well. It's good to see people from all over. And since you made your Ohio State crack, even from that state up north, it's really good to see you all, which is a great state. There's lots to love up there. So I really see my role tonight as being more of a facilitator, because I certainly don't have all the answers. I don't think any of us have all the answers in this new environment, but I'm sure many of you have answers that I don't have. So when I was talking with my colleagues about doing this and the topic that Mark and I had selected, they said, please come back with lots of good ideas. So I'm hoping that we have lots and lots of good ideas. I'm going to try to share my slides, although I was not smart enough. I don't think I've had to present from Zoom yet. So, so if I share here, this. Okay, can you see that? And then what if I, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. Does that work for people? You can see that? Okay. So, you know, I was thinking about our coffee hour here, and I told my folks that I was hosting a coffee hour, and they said, that's funny, you don't drink coffee. And so that got me thinking that, right, we're all drinking different things here, right? So, and our classroom cultures are all going to be even more different, right? Even more variety than any of the beverages that we might choose to be indulging in at this time. You notice that this is a very family-friendly slide. You know, no matter what time it is where you are drinking, everything here is non-alcoholic. But anyway, so, you know, for some of us, you know, our classroom may be more like the plastic water bottle, and for some of us, maybe it's the fancy teacup. That culture and community, more so than maybe anything else in education, right, depends so much on the combination of things that come to the classroom. So we're all different teachers, our student populations are different. We have now all these new differences that are going to be thrown at us through the technologies that are available to us, the technologies that are available to our students, whether they're going to be matches or mismatches there, the different situations our administrations are going to put us into, right? There's just so many variables here. And so again, we're not going to have a one-size-fits-all answer to anything that we talk about tonight. So hopefully lots of people with lots of different backgrounds and classroom culture experiences can share their ideas, and we can all pick a few good tools to put into our toolboxes. So that's really my hope. And so when we put this together, we were sort of thinking about these four things, and we don't have to talk about them in order. We don't have to talk about all of them. We can, as Mark said, we can go talk about something else completely different. But I thought, you know, this is a new challenge for us. Even those of us that have felt like we've done a pretty good job of creating a good classroom culture, right? Now that we're not in the same room with people at the beginning of the year, what are we going to do? How are we going to get to know our students? How are we going to have them get to know who we are? How are we going to have them collaborate when they're not together? I don't necessarily want to get into the technical aspects of how do I do this lab online, because I think there have already been discussions about that in previous coffee hours. But how do we get them to collaborate over a distance? on lab things, on other assignments that we've normally done, building projects that we've had. And then how do we keep that from going too far? So how do we decide what is going to be unauthorized collaboration, if anything, and how do we help our students know what we mean by academic integrity and what are we going to need to do to uphold that? So that's kind of what I was thinking about. That's on my slides. So what ideas do people have?
If you'd let me jump to the last topic on authorized versus unauthorized collaboration. I actually gave quite a bit of thought to this years ago when I was setting up my freshman lab class. And I do this also in the senior lab. What we tell our students is all collaboration is allowed, but the only unforgivable sin is not giving credit where credit is due. So you can talk to anybody you want. You can get any resource you want. Go online and get any resource you want, into the library, get any resource you want, as long as you give proper credit.
I've done something very similar to that. Tell my students to work together with each other as much as they can, because they can get more information from each other than they can from me. However, when I have things like homework and tests, numbers are not the answer. The paragraph that's written to complement the numbers and complement the work is worth more, a lot more, than the mathematics in the final result. It's much easier to copy someone's math than to copy someone's written thoughts. And that allows students to work together in preparing for tests, allows them to work together on homework, but still allows me to be sure, or fairly certain, that they have all, if not done everything themselves, at least understood it well enough to talk about it.
So I'm a high school teacher, and Kathy, we've met before, I think.
Of course. How are you?
Good. Yeah. So I mean, my classes are about 30 students, and there is some talk about if we do remote combo, they may combine sections. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could be more than 30 in a class. And I'm thinking, you know, in the first days of school, I work really hard to get to know people's names. We do a game that helps me learn their names and helps new students who are like just came in to learn everyone's names. And then we do activities, like we do things, I put them in groups, we actually do something. And I'm flummoxed about how to, get that started. So I know you're asking for suggestions, but I'm really just kind of grasping at straws at this point about how to get that going.
Yeah, so what do people think about that? So yeah, how do we help our students get to know each other, get to know us? How do we learn their names? We can't walk around the room with a seating chart or whatever we do to try to get a jump start on that.
I think it's also asking the question, is it, in the long run, is it worth us taking time at the beginning of a course in the semester to actually do community building activities that have nothing to do with teaching physics or the subject? You know, has anyone considered this idea of, you know, the first 2 sessions, the first week, some fixed amount of time to say, I'm not going to teach you kinematics. We are going to talk about community and how we're going to make this group operate in whatever environment we're in.
I can talk from what my students have advised me, not from my own impressions. I've always talked a lot to my students and given them an opportunity to make suggestions on a weekly basis. And they have told me that knowing each other is more important than knowing me, because they know that I'm there, they know how to reach me, they know what I have to provide, which is mostly confidence. But knowing each other and communicating with each other is the only way to talk about difficulties that I have not experienced in 20 years, yet their classmates are experiencing right then and there. They feel much more comfortable talking with their classmates. They tell me that classmates that expect them to contribute drive them to contribute. A professor that expects them to contribute only drives them to appear to be contributing, which students have said are two very different things.
So in my experience recently, last several years, we do spend, I teach one of many parallel sections of a course, and we have all first-year students. So that's a little bit special, you know, because they really don't know what to expect. And I teach in the morning, so I'm the very first college class they've ever had. And so they don't have as many preconceived ideas about how weird I am or how unusual things are that I might ask them to do. But we, among other things, the first day have several activities where we want them talking with each other. All right, so we'll usually have some kind of introduction. We have played human bingo. I don't know if you're familiar with human bingo or not. It sounds like it's almost dangerous, but it's not. But you know, where you have students walk around the room and find people who fit various categories on a little, 5x5 grid, and get to meet each other at least a little bit. And it's not something that helps them form a deep relationship the first day, but at least they're having conversations with a number of different people. And maybe the next day when they come to class, they remember, oh yeah, that's the person that had 3 dogs and a cat as pets, or that's the person that has been to the top floor of the library, or whatever it is. We haven't figured out how to do something like that virtually, and I don't know if we can. But the other piece that I think goes along with that, and it kind of rides off of what Ken said, is that we have a lot of studio time in our class. So time for students to work on things together, sometimes independently, but talk with each other while they're doing that. And one of the skills that I've cultivated over the years, and that I'm really wondering about what I can do with in a virtual environment, is that I'm really good at being busy when they're about to figure out something on their own, but they don't know it yet, right? So they're ready to ask me for help. Or it's a question that I have teaching assistants, actually more learning assistants, right? And getting them to realize that the learning assistants are a valuable resource. I'm not the one with all the knowledge. I don't want to be the one with all the knowledge. I want them to learn how to work together. I want them to get that value that Ken talked about, of knowing that learning from each other is one of the best things they can do. So how can I pretend to not know what they're doing now? And how can I pretend that I don't hear them when it's virtual? How, even if I put them in breakout rooms, which I have not played with very much on Zoom, but I'd like to hear more about from people that have. If I put them in breakout rooms, I mean, I know I'm not always going to be in their breakout room. And a debate that we've been having is, do we have as many breakout rooms as we have instructors available at the time? So, or should we deliberately not do that? Should we make sure that there's some times when they're talking about stuff and we're not there, so that they can have some of those conversations and learn that their classmates are resources? That's like the big thing that I'm struggling with.
We did use breakout rooms extensively in the freshman physics class, and actually we assigned groups of 5. So the students, we just told them, you 4 people. We gave them the option at the beginning of class. If you have 4 other people that you want to work with, you can tell me what group you want to be in. And then after the people had self-selected, which was less than half the class, we just assigned groups, small groups. And in the lab sessions, we sent them into their breakout rooms in their groups routinely, and encouraged them to use their Zoom resources to consult with each other over the homeworks and the lab reports and everything. And in the end, when they submitted a report, that report would typically have all 5 authors on it, just like a research paper. So yeah, we used the breakout rooms extensively, and we assigned groups of 5 to work together. We tried to give them priority, so where if they chose to work with other people, we'd let them do that. And those that we assigned, we tried to make sure we're in the same time zone at least, to the extent possible. But that seemed to work well. A lot of students didn't really know where to start, or if they didn't know anybody else, they needed to be introduced to their colleagues, and we sort of facilitated that just by telling them what group they were going to be in.
Did you
Jason?
find, oh, sorry.
Sorry,
I was
Jason.
wondering, did you find that like everybody in the group participated pretty well from what you could see? Like was 5 a good number for that size of group for what you were having them do?
Oh yeah. And when they're in person, of course, they work in pairs with lab partners. But virtually, yeah, I think 5 worked. If you're in person, 3 is too many. There's always 1 is a third wheel. But virtually, I think 5 worked well. We didn't have any complaints.
So I kind of want to address maybe some of the things that were said earlier as far as that first day. I've also, like you, Kathy, I do people bingo. That's just one of my favorite go-tos. However, I have a situation where the students, I'm in a small liberal arts college, they know each other really well. But they don't know me very well. So this is kind of the opposite of what Ken was saying. I do the people bingo and I say, just go around and talk to every person in the room for this. And typically, maybe towards the end, one person comes up to me and asks me, which I want them to do. And I put a lot of them that I'm on there. And I make a point and I asked them, why didn't you come up and ask me? Because I wanted to break that barrier. So I've used people bingo in order to not only break barriers between students, but also between me and the students, that I'm also a person, I should be approachable, starting a dialogue that way. But I've given about most of the beginning of my classes, doing these introductory things, but also I've had to spend time setting norms. And I think maybe that was the question earlier, is we want to get to know each other, but then I have to go into detail about setting various norms. And sometimes they're silly, like how do we turn our chairs to, a work in a group? But I find that that's probably one of the more important things just to spend the first day on.
What kinds of things are people thinking we're going to have to, what kinds of new norms are we going to have to set in a remote environment? Things that we may have never thought about before when we were face to face.
Big thing for me is in labs and in discussion quizzes and even in iClickers, students, if a group of students didn't know what to do, they could always send a student over to another table or over to another group of students that seemed to be understanding what was going on. And every group would have its ambassador, because spied is not a good word for it. Ambassador is a much more appreciated term by the students. And someone in the group would choose to be, and if a group was struggling and just humming around, I would maybe wander over and suggest that they send somebody over to that group in the corner that seems to be doing so well and find out what they're doing. And I don't know how to do that in a Zoom sort of environment because I don't believe students can jump from group to group. And that means they have to ask me or only their group. Well, if their group isn't sure what to do, how can I have them bypass me and not use me as the ultimate source of information, but perhaps another group that's already figured out something brilliant and is willing to explain it to them? And that is a sort of communication between students that builds up a willingness to be ready. Because if they're working and another person from another group comes over and says, I can't figure this out, we can't figure this out, what have you done? Well, if all they're doing is sitting there and saying, what are you talking about? We haven't even looked at the assignment yet. It's embarrassing. And that embarrassment, that guilt, potential of guilt, is what a lot of my physics students say drives them to want to do well. It's a way to show off to others, not as an individual, but as a group. It's a way to go beyond what's required. And I don't know of any way online to inspire a person to want to do more than is necessary for the pleasure of doing more. Whereas in groups, in face-to-face, I know how to do that, because all I have to do is that they want to do well. But when they're working together and mixing up and seeing everybody, they want to help each other. And a lot of the students don't know how to do that online. Even if I were to tell them, I don't think a lot of them would even know what to do. Some would do something like join in a Google Meet. But most, except for the group of 5 students that we all met together and talked together, and they just spent 80% of the time talking to each other, and then referring back to me whenever the need was there. Except that class, I ended up with students stuck in one group. That group didn't know what to do, but couldn't ask another group. And I don't know, is it possible to have students go from group to group in such a situation?
And how big were your groups? Were they groups of 5?
Yeah, 4 or 5.
Okay.
I think in the chat, someone said, make everyone a co-host, and you can do that. Ken, have you used Piazza as far as a method for communication between you and students, and also with students being able to ask anonymous questions?
I don't think I even know what it is.
Yeah.
It's
Go ahead.
It's a forum, but I use it outside of I use it specifically because of the anonymous feature, because students feel more comfortable sometimes asking an anonymous question of the instructor, but they can post an anonymous question for other students to see also.
So this brings to mind something that might seem initially unrelated, but something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. So when I've been in person the last 2 years, I stumbled through actually a couple of other people at AAPT across a concept called visibly random grouping. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that or not. I am becoming a huge fan. It comes out of the math education literature in K-12. The main researcher on it is a guy named Peter Liljadal, I think is how you say it. And the idea is that you mix students up in groups. He would advocate for daily. I have found that weekly works quite well, given a number of other things going on in my course, that the weekly rhythm is a pretty good thing. But the idea is if you mix the students up maybe more frequently than we normally would, and you let them know that it's happening randomly, you're not really choosing the groups. So that's a little harder, I think, to figure out how we do virtually. But I just do it when we're in person by having my students pull a card with a table letter on it, and then they just go and sit at table A or table B or whatever. I have some colleagues that do it with a pre-made spreadsheet, but they show them the spreadsheet the first day of class, and they say, this spreadsheet doesn't know who you are, but it already knows where you're going to sit. There's a lot of really interesting things that come out of that model, of that approach. And one of the things that they see is a natural breaking down of barriers between your students, and more mobility of knowledge, I think is the phrase that they use. So once this has happened for a little while, there's enough group switching that has happened, then the students don't feel like they have to restrict themselves to the people sitting at their table. They also do not see the teacher as much of a source of authority. They look to the classroom. So there's a lot more co-constructed knowledge, both within an assigned group and across the classroom. The other thing that you'll see that's really cool, if you look at, there's a lot of math teachers that have blogs about this, is that it's turning out to be a fabulous diversity and inclusion kind of strategy, right? Because whenever we put students into groups, they naturally assume that we've done it for a reason. And let's be honest, we usually do, right? You know, even if it's like, you know, Jerry and Joe can't work together, right? We usually have some kind of ulterior motive for why we've done it, whether we do a, you know, University of Minnesota stratified random kind of approach, or we do a thing where we want all the students that have been doing really well to work together. When a student goes into a group and they don't know that it's random, they assume that you've put them there for a reason, and they assume that there is a role that they need to fill. So for instance, they might say, oh, well, this is clearly the group of all the smart kids today. And we can talk about what smart kid means, but whatever. This is all the smart kids. So I don't have to work too hard because the rest of them are going to take care of it. Or, oh, I am clearly the girl in the group today. So I guess I'll do all the recording or whatever, right? They just assume motives and things that we want them to do. And so one of the things about making it obvious that we're putting them together and even letting them work together when they're people we wouldn't normally put together, but standing by whatever our cards or spreadsheet tells us, breaks down those barriers. It's kind of wild. I'm looking forward, it's a pretty new idea, and I'm looking forward to seeing some more research on it. But I'm trying to figure out if there's some way we can incorporate something like that into what Ken was talking about, so that maybe there is more mobility of knowledge throughout the class. Because if they work with somebody that they like, right? I mean, they're gonna, of course, exchange phone numbers, right? So they could still be Zooming with 5 people, and they could be texting somebody that they worked with last week, you know, because we know they're really good at that, right? So talking with one person and texting with somebody else. So maybe we can harness some of that as well. Sorry, I went on a little too long there. What other ideas do people have or questions?
So we do can you hear me?
Yes.
So I teach it's the first semester of our physics major freshman lab. We have a separate class at UC Berkeley, and we actually do the first class, the first real class meeting. We go over norms, the very first one. We break it up into about a third of the class goes together and does one lab setup, the next one another. And so they it's an icebreaker because they all, 8 of them will be working together, and then we switch them. But then after that, we do what you're saying, we do I randomly will assign them by week. So they have 2 meetings a week. And what I found is that they get to know people that they would not normally know. And some of them have made friendships that they take until they're seniors. So it's actually, I think, a really good way of doing it. And I'm trying to figure out if I should continue doing that in the fall, because we're going to be doing remote. And I'm hoping to hear what other people think about that, how it would work. If we if every week we change, like you're saying, these groups.
Yeah, I think we want to give that a try, but we haven't figured out all the details either.
So when I was doing face-to-face, I usually try to make the students to do different group every couple of weeks or something, but they wouldn't want to leave their chairs to move. I found it very hard. They just wanted to work with the people they already know. They don't want to work with other people. So I found that really hard. And I was really, really happy with Zoom breakout room that I can just assign them randomly. They have to just go to that room and do something about it. But I'm going to be completely online in the fall, synchronous lecture and having breakout Zooms. But I'm also worried about if I do that rendering every time, they don't get to know anybody deeply. Just every time it's random and they just kind of got lost in the group. So I'm trying to decide how I should do it. Just should I assign them to group through the whole semester, or maybe change it several times, or should I do random just every class and just by chance? I can't decide which one would be better.
Just a personal preference on my part is I find that very often the students benefit from working with the same lab partner throughout the term. And oftentimes you'll see them work with the same lab partner through multiple terms as well. They'll forge a collaborative friendship. And yeah, I did this when I was an undergraduate. I was an experimental guy, and I worked with a guy who was stronger in theory, and we complemented one another. We discovered we complemented one another early on, and we just ran with that. And a lot of my students do the same thing. If they get into a pair or group and it's not working, no skin off my nose, you can switch groups. That's just fine with me. But if they get into a collaboration that they really enjoy and they find profitable, I like to let them stick with it.
Yeah, so okay, Mark wants to say something and he's in charge, so.
No, I'm not in charge. I have no responsibilities. No, it's been interesting. There's been some interesting questions in the chat about this, and we've been spending a lot of time talking about randomizing who's in a group, but in the chat, there's been some interesting comments about the roles that people have in those groups. And if you are randomizing those roles, or you're allowing people to kind of choose what they're good at, as Eric was suggesting, the theorist versus the experimentalist.
I would like to point out what I did in labs was, as the students walked into the room, they drew a card, the top card from a deck of cards. That told them which table they sat at. They each had a suit. And then after everybody was at their table with their card, I took the next 4 cards and shuffled them up, and then each suit was drawn to indicate a certain task. One was computations, person in charge of computations. Didn't mean they had to work the computer, but they had to be sure that the computer and the calculations were done correctly. Another one was equipment advisor. Didn't have to handle all the equipment, but had to be sure it was handled correctly and put back correctly. And one was ambassador. Again, didn't have to be the one that always talked, but it was that person's responsibility to be sure that communication happened. And by mixing up this responsibilities based on the card that they drew and the table that they sat at, mixing up who they saw, in the class of which was usually 15 to 20 students, the lab, there was usually 15 to 20 students, within about 3 weeks, they knew almost everybody, and they knew almost all of the sides of working on an experiment. They didn't like it for about 4 weeks. By about the 8th week, they loved it. And the students that didn't want to participate, the coattail riders, if you will, when it was just choose your groups, would often end up with 2 students that really liked to work and 2 or 3 students that did not like to work, but did not like to interfere, would not get in the way of the 2 hard workers. And you'd end up with a group of 4 or 5 where only 2 did almost everything. And as long as the others didn't get in their way, they really didn't care. And they just put those people's names on the write-up that they wrote along with their own. And so about half the students worked hard, and about half the students just sat around and let the other half work hard. When they started getting mixed up every week, you would end up with a group of only people who didn't do much work the previous week. And by about the 4th or 5th week, everyone was working because they never knew whether they were going to be with a group of people who liked to work alone and were willing to, or a group of people that had no idea what was going on because they hadn't even read the book. And that made them much more prepared for the lab because they didn't know what to expect.
One of the things that I've seen, and I've seen it with my own students, and I've heard about it from my friends that I got the idea of visibly random grouping from, is that they very much like it that if they end up in a group with somebody they don't like, or that they grow to not like, that it's such a short-term thing that they put in more effort than they would otherwise. And I thought that was just fascinating. And when we did some assessment after we tried it with our course the first time, we saw that articulated quite a lot. So I said, yeah, they don't get to know as many people in the class, you know, and form as deep friendships as they might otherwise, but they, you know, they can get away from a bad group mate if they need to. And they develop a lot of really good skills when it comes to learning how to work with other people, and they get a lot more diverse opinions. So it's been a really interesting ride since we started doing that a couple of years ago. So Mark, what else do we have in the chat?
So there was some interesting things, and this is a personal thing that showed up in the chat, was about using things like Slack or Discord as a way of bringing students together. But also I want to extend that a little bit, and we haven't really talked about this idea of a hybrid model where we have some students face-to-face and some that aren't. And you know, I have this question about do we think that tools like Slack or Discord or whatever the modality is a means of bringing students together that are in this hybrid scenario? Because I guess this hybrid scenario is a likelihood for some of us, and we haven't talked about it yet. That's why. No one. No one wants to face that reality of a hybrid scenario.
So by hybrid, you mean some people in the classroom and some not?
Correct. Yeah. Some people sitting in front of you or sitting in the room with you, and some, you know, 1,000 miles away.
Sounds like twice as much work to me, so I'm trying to avoid it at all costs.
It is a likelihood for me personally. And what I'd like, personally, I think it might be beneficial if even the people in the classroom are on the online platform at the same time, because we're doing synchronous, hybrid synchronous.
Mm-hmm.
So that we're all looking at the same thing, but I can also see the real life faces of the people who are in the classroom. But in some sense, we're all equals. Whether you're in the classroom or not, we're looking at the same whiteboard, electronic whiteboard, or whatever. That's my only thought so far.
I had toyed with the idea of hybrid, that is, you know, you group people, have some of them in class, some of them not in one group. So the ones in the classroom becomes the ambassadors that they can ask questions. But that's as far as I have gone. I just go, then I went completely offline. I just went online.
See, John has a comment, or Drew, I should say.
No, let me go back a little bit. So, you know, we've always completely randomized groups here. So, I mean, you know, since we're often teaching in a collaborative learning space that holds 100 students, you know, I've got 25 tables of 4 people. You know, I had somebody make myself a set of cards, numbered 1 through 25, 4 times. Students walk in, they grab a card. And so, you know, otherwise, when people don't do that, unfortunately, you'd end up with a table with 4 Chinese students at it, speaking Chinese. You'd end up other groups that you didn't want, you know, not interacting with each other. So we basically had to randomize. And so, you know, I started teaching yesterday live. And so, you know, I had them an hour today. Well, I had them 3 hours today, actually, but an hour of it was a solid hour-long group activity on Zoom. And I liked the fact that it was completely randomized as soon as I distributed them. The problem is that, when I train all our learning assistants to do this stuff, I say, when someone at a table asks you a question, the last thing you want to do is answer it. The first thing you want to do is ask the other 3 people sitting there what they think the answer is, so that you have a feel for where everybody at the table is intellectually. And that was a lot harder in Zoom. It was hard to get some of them to even say anything. And it's certainly possible. I have a number of students from the Middle East where it was like 10 p.m. there when they're taking my class. They may have been logged on, but not really there. I don't even know. But they showed up as being in the room, but I can't be sure they were really present. But the other one issue I did have was I had 5 other people moving around with me, helping out, but they weren't able to see when somebody raised their hand. I saw them and I kept moving rooms. They told me they were just randomly moving around, but they never saw any of the hand raising. So I don't know if I was doing something wrong, but they were all co-hosts, so they could all move around, but you didn't actually see student questions directly. So if anyone knows what I might have done wrong there, let me know. But it's certainly not ideal. You can tell because the activity they did today is something I've tried many times. It goes much slower on Zoom. No question.
So question back to the idea of norms. So assuming that we're doing some of our classes or either hybrid or remotely, and there are going to be people in an environment like this, do we require that they show their faces? Do we not? How do we feel about that? Like, what are those kinds of norms that we're going to need to set? And again, there's no right answer, right? We all have different cultures that we're creating in different situations we're teaching in, but what are people's thoughts on those kinds of norms that we should be thinking about?
They should be sitting at a desk when their camera's on and not in bed. I had some of that last semester.
I definitely like to see their faces just to know that they're there and not just logged on and walked away from the computer.
That was
I totally want to see my students' faces because that tells me whether or not they're understanding what I'm saying. And I've had issues when we did this, turning, this last semester, just completely redoing everything, that I thought that it would be obvious you would have your camera on, but most students did not want to do that. So I had to continuously ask them to do that. So that's part of the norms that I'll be definitely talking about that first day.
But it's hard to do that for large class. Even everybody has camera on, you only see, like today's participants, I see only a third of page here. I have to page through. And if I'm sharing screen, my PowerPoint slides, and I don't see who is actually there, and there's also the bandwidth. That's have to worry.
So we've been playing with, what are the norms that we're going to try to establish, or we've been calling it the glue that's going to hold our class together. What kind of glue are we going to have to put in place so that we're all developing community together? But then also the class that I teach in, again, I teach in parallel with several other people. We have never had anything resembling participation points before. And we kind of feel like we need that now. And since we haven't done it, we're not quite sure what the behaviors are that we need to encourage for participation. Is it having your camera on? Or if from one of the great reasons that people brought up, we can't require that they have their camera on. Can they do something else instead to get those points? Do we want to require them to meet with us outside of class? What does participation mean, and what will do the most good for our students to get them actively engaged and again, making communication with each other, community with each other? What are ideas there?
One thing I would suggest, based on my experiences with iClickers, wouldn't work quite the same, but will work similarly. As I understand it, in Zoom, you can have some sort of quiz. I'm not sure how to do it yet. I'm still researching that, where you can have like answers A to E be the answers that every student has to enter when the question is posed. Polls, I believe they're called.
Hey, Ken,
Huh?
we used it a lot, and you have to set up the quizzes ahead of time before you start the meeting. and each question has to be its own quiz.
So you can't just type a question somewhere and say, or have it on a PowerPoint and just say, answer A through E with respect to this slide that you're seeing.
Well, you could tie it to a slide and then share your screen, certainly. And we did that a lot, but you can't type it up on the fly. You have to do it all ahead of time, think it out all ahead of time before you start the meeting.
Because that, with clickers, what I would do is have the questions on PowerPoint. And then when a question came up, have everybody answer. And if just about everybody agreed, then it was over, but I still knew who answered later on. Whereas if everyone did not agree, if there was significant disagreement, then I could have them talk to each other, or in Zoom, perhaps put them in breakout rooms to discuss it for a minute or two, and then come back and ask again. Now in Zoom, if I had that second asking, could I skip it or just turn it on and turn it off to bypass it? If everybody, say, got it right or agreed with the right answer the first time, and set up two ahead of time, like a first and a second for each question. Because with the clickers, if usually I had to do it twice. First time, only about half the people got it right. Gave them like 3 points if they got it right, 2 points if they got it wrong. No points if they didn't answer. But it was a way to see if they were there. And then if they didn't participate, usually their answers didn't improve. But after the discussion with neighbors, or in Zoom, perhaps in a randomly selected breakout room, I would expect that just about everybody would get it right the second time, just as happened in the classrooms. Maybe make the breakout room 6 to 8 people.
Hey, Ken, we did do that. We actually never wrote 2 questions. We would write 1 question, and then if a significant fraction of them got it wrong, we would send them to the breakout rooms to discuss, and then come back and re-poll them with that same question.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, you can do that. And we never skipped a question, but I'm assuming if you can re-poll with the same question, that you can skip a question too.
Re-polling might be easier. I still have to find, I've not used Zoom very much at all. Our school just recently got the full level Zoom. Last semester, everyone just had access to the free version of Zoom. And so a lot of people are, for the first time, using it, myself included.
I thought Zoom you can write a simple question on the fly just to poll the students. I thought that I have done that, just very quick, just a very short question and ask them to answer. So that's possible. But I actually use iClicker. I don't use the poll feature on Zoom. I like iClicker. So.
I'm not sure. How do you use iClicker from a distance?
The same way you use it in class.
Well, in class, they had all the little clickers and the base at the front of the room.
Oh, my students just use their phone. We don't have base. I just use iClicker software, but the students use their phones to answer.
We had trouble with that because all the ceilings of our college were steel. And cell phones only work near the windows.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have that problem, and so
all the heating and air conditioning is on the roof.
I'm impressed that you figured out how to write a Zoom poll on the fly. I couldn't figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I didn't think you could
work
do
for
that
me
either. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just made one.
There you go.
We are scientists, are we not?
Can you give me a reference that would tell me something about how to do that, or put it up in the chat for people to use, or any thoughts on?
I think only the host can do that.
Yeah.
The host see a button say polling or something.
Yeah, there's a button that says polling.
Oh, okay.
And you can, the suggestion of setting up the questions ahead of time is the right way to go if you know that doing it on the fly is a little bit harder, but it also, I think, depends a little bit on what paid level of Zoom you have. If you have the basic pay account, I think you have to do it ahead of time. If you have the fancier one, then you can do it on the fly.
Okay.
I do know that if you want to do a multiple choice question with multiple responses, like select all that apply, there's a limit to how many you can have people pick.
Yeah.
Because I was in a meeting where they gave us a list of 12 people to invite for something, and it turned out you could only pick 5 or something. And then we were told to pick 6, and the 6 box would not check. So
I'm remembering now. I didn't get the poll button as a host unless I had set up a poll to begin with. So it may be that you just have to check enable polling, and then you get the poll button. I could only get the poll button if I had created a poll beforehand.
Oh.
Yeah. One of the things that I know that we've been talking about, we've been having a number of ongoing conversations in my department over the summer as we've supposedly had some choice, but we pretty much all decided to go completely online for the fall, figuring that if we were wrong, that was the easiest thing to recover from, right? So we've been having a lot of discussions about what we need to figure out with the technology. And I think one day we're just going to, save a bunch of time, and we're going to set up Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting just to play with different options, or just, course delivery methods, or just any of the technology testing that we want to do, so that we've done that testing before the students are there. So I think that is something that we should probably all be thinking about, is how many of these new ideas we need to test with our friends on the faculty before we do it in front of our brand new students.
There's another system that I haven't heard much conversation about in these coffee hours, but I think it's worth bringing up. Is anyone use Nearpod for these types of things? So Nearpod is PowerPoint-like. You make slides, but then you can embed questions, like clicker questions, in the slides. You can embed open-ended comments. You can even do drawings. And then you push it out to your students. So each student gets a little code, they sign in, anonymously sign in even, and then they essentially are screen sharing your presentation, but when it comes to a question, then they can answer the question, whether it's multiple choice, open-ended, drawing, lots of different things. And it integrates quite nicely with Google Slides in particular. I know a lot of K-12 teachers in kind of my circle of people that have found Nearpod to be a good solution for a lot of these engagement questions.
I saw somebody has in the chat has a question about how smoothly breakout room go in and out. I find it actually takes time, because once you start, and there's a countdown for sending students to the room, the students have to sign into the room, and then when you finish the breakout room, and there's another countdown, and the students come out of the room. So I use iClicker, and when the students answer questions, if they didn't get many, if not all of them got it correct, and I usually try to explain it. I don't usually send them to a breakout room for that reason, because it's not easy to do breakout room just for a minute, half a minute, to have a simple conversation and then come back. It's not like in the classroom. It actually takes a lot longer. So I usually, when I do the breakout room, I do one activity rather than do work groups together for 10, 20 minutes, half an hour, like that.
There's ways to send people quicker to breakout rooms. Like you can make it so they don't have to push any buttons that'll just force them into the room and stuff like that, but it's still slower than in person. I think mostly because when you're in a classroom with groups, you can hear all the groups. You can eavesdrop on everybody simultaneously, but with the breakouts, you have to visit each one or not visit them. And it's just harder. I found the breakout rooms a little bit cumbersome for that reason. Not for the technology so much as just because I couldn't hear them all at the same time.
Maybe something like chat room, just doing it through the group chat would be useful in a situation like that.
Beth, maybe I can't remember the exact URL. Maybe you can help me with this. But one of the other options I was curious about was for group work, where you know that you're going to be doing group work and you want to quickly run around inside between groups, is to use the gather.town website. Is that, I forget the exact URL.
Gather.town. It's a website that you enter into. You can create whatever space. They have a couple of standard spaces, and everybody gets an avatar, and your video shows up, and you can walk and enter the space, and you can actually set your kind of interaction distance, but you can get groups set up. I could imagine one could get groups set up, and the instructor would walk from group to group, and you can kind of listen in without, and you could probably send people across to different groups. I actually had a colleague that used it for a faculty development program that they had to run virtually, and she said it worked really good. So try it. You know, it's really it looks kind of 90s. With
it looks very like 8-bit computer graphics.
It's cute. Yeah.
It's very old school in that look, but it gives you that feel of physically walking around a room, and you can tell you tell your students, okay, group one, go stand by that chair, which means everybody like walks themselves over to a place. And then as they walk away from you, their image, their video slowly fades away because now they're too far away from you to be listened to. So you can actually separate people, and yeah, I don't know. I've never tried it, but it might solve that issue of how fast you can jump around inside a Zoom room.
Right, and students can share their screen. So if they're working on a project or something, they can share a screen and share their work. So it would be an interesting thing to try in a class.
It would be interesting to try in a class.
We're going to be using gather.town at the AAPT summer meeting. Yeah. Something to look forward to if you're attending.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to try. So another question I was wondering, one, because I think it's interesting, but two, it also plugs another AAPT project that I work on, is the idea of using some of our projects like Step Up as a way of building community at the beginning of a course, to bring people together to talk about careers in physics, to talk about implicit bias in physics. Clearly, these are more difficult conversations, but the end goal of that is to build a community of people that is more aware of their interactions with each other, more respectful, more kind of cognizant of how they interact with people. And I'm curious if anyone's considered using those types of resources. That's relatively specific, so. And it was a blatant attempt to plug another AAPT product.
Sounds like you gave people food for thought.
Just what is, I'm not sure I even remember what Step Up is.
So Step Up is an NSF supported program that has the larger goal of trying to improve the number of women who pursue careers in physics. And it has 3 components, 2 of which are lessons, and 1 is kind of what we call the everyday actions, which really is about setting norms for a community. 1 lesson is just about careers in physics, meaning what can you do if you study physics? And it is nothing more than that, except the examples that are used happen to be mostly women. And so it's a very subtle push in the idea that the students in your courses can see themselves using physics in the future. The second lesson is a little bit more upfront, and it is a directed conversation about implicit bias, and implicit bias particularly in the physics community. I would not suggest you start with that one, but it's a very good program, and we have some data that really shows the benefits for all students to start to see the value of understanding physics, whether they become physicists or not, but it brings value to the course. We also have some good information about, some good data about how it builds community amongst the students, and they start to really see each other differently and more respectfully interact.
Yeah, and I don't know what's going on with all the different section meetings, you know, in the fall and whatever, but a number of sections have been inviting people that are trained as step-up ambassadors to do workshop sessions at section meetings. So I know that Southern Ohio had one planned for spring, and then it was like a week after we all went on quarantine. So we canceled the meeting, and it's been postponed till the fall, and we're anticipating on having that session in the fall. But it's not that hard to get in touch with somebody who's a step-up ambassador and get them to do a workshop.
I did attend a workshop like that, now that you tell me what it is. And I had quite a bit of trouble with it myself, I think because a lot of the problems, no, I should say a lot of the fears they talked about never bothered me in my entire life. For example, belonging. I still don't understand what that means, because I don't think I've ever felt belonging or not belonging to anything. It's always been either I can participate or I cannot participate. And if I cannot participate, then find a way to do so. I really don't know what the word emotionally means, so I don't know what it means to feel like I don't belong.
Yeah,
so there's
oh, go ahead.
No, there's a lot of really excellent research on that's been done in cognitive science. And I can't remember who coined the term sense of belonging, but you can Google and see that there are a lot of studies that are done in a variety of educational settings. And so it's not an area of research that I've touched on very much, in the research that I've done. It hasn't intersected with it as much. But there are definitely studies that say, oh, if people in this particular group tend to feel like they don't belong, they look around the room and they feel like they're different from everybody else, then there's often a reaction in people, not always, but there's often a reaction like, oh, I don't really belong here. Right? I don't belong here because I'm different from all these other people that are here. I walked into a room full of physicists and none of them look like me, or none of them get my sense of humor, or whatever it is. That sometimes is a barrier that will keep people from participating as fully in that group and that group's activities. So it's interesting stuff to read, and it makes you think a little bit differently about how some of your students are perceiving classroom interactions.
I think one reason I've had trouble with that is I've never seen 2 people as the same.
Right. And it's not about what we see as a teacher.
I've never felt the same as anyone else.
Right. So it's not about what we see as a teacher, right? I'm a female physicist and electrical engineer. I look around a lot of rooms and there's nobody that looks like me, and nobody in the world has my bizarre sense of humor. So I've gotten used to that, right? But when I think about my students and I look at them and I know that they can most of them can do pretty much whatever they put their minds to. How do I help them know that that is true for them, right? And so it's more about what's happening inside other people's heads and what their perceptions are, and how we as instructors can help them to see that you don't have to look like all the other people in the room to do what they're doing, right?
Effie, I've heard this articulated in many workshops, but you mentioned the peer-reviewed papers. I would be very interested to see those papers if you have those references available.
I'll have to look. No, somebody else on here might, like Beth probably does, and maybe Kelly does. Not to pick on you all, but I know that you've spent a lot more time in that space than I have.
If you go to I'm sorry, go ahead, Beth.
I was going to say, I'm looking, there's a report that was put out by the American Institute of Physics. It's the Team Up report, and there's a lot about belonging in this. I'm looking right now to give any references, but maybe if I put this one in the chat for now, we can also, Mark and I can follow up maybe with some other references, but they do, I think, a good job of describing it there. I'll find it real quickly. Also,
I think Kelly put in the chat the link to the Step Up site, the engage.aps.org, or you can just use stepupphysics.org is the faster way to get to the exact same place. And on that website, there's a good listing of the peer-reviewed journal articles on belonging and, as Kelly put it, STEM identity, although in the Step Up context, we make it more specific and say physics identity. But yeah, no, there's a lot of good peer-reviewed work in this area.
Yeah, I've been seeing an increasing number of papers that are looking at, say, STEM retention or sometimes engineering retention in the early years of college. And so not necessarily by any specific group or whatever, but they're looking at a variety of factors that they think affect whether students stay in particular majors or choose certain majors. And sense of belonging is often one of a number of factors that they look at in those early college years to help understand why students make some of the decisions that they do as they're exploring majors. So again, everything that I've read uses it. I'll have to look back and see who they refer to as the people that got it all started.
I'm just saying that when people say, I don't feel like I belong, I honestly have no idea what they're talking about because I don't believe I know what it feels like.
Yeah, and
so I don't know what they're saying. I don't know how to interpret the words because I've never seen how to. I've never had anyone explain it to me. They just say you just feel it.
Sure, and I understand what you're saying, and I have experienced those feelings too, but that's also because both of us are in the most normative category of physicists, which is white male, and that's easy enough.
Beards and glasses too. Sorry.
And glasses and facial hair, goatee or beard, I can't tell. But see, it's we have all the trappings of the most normative category of physicists, so it's easy to overlook people that aren't in that normative group. Or to understand, not to overlook them, but to understand their perspective. That's a better way of saying it, I think.
And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to make a suggestion. And it may sound offensive, but I don't want it to be taken that way. I mean this in all sincerity. You should get out of your comfort zone. Find some activities or groups or music festivals or something that you might otherwise not go to, or maybe even feel uncomfortable going to, and go to them and try and experience that.
I've actually done that, and I will start communicating, and just because the thought to communicate comes, and some people will listen to what I say and some people won't, and it really doesn't bother me whether they do or not because it's their option. I grew up in an environment with a very, what you would call a lower class neighborhood. Some of my friends were black, some of my friends were white. In grade school, my best friends were from India. And like when I went over to their house to eat stuff that was very, very strongly spiced, I didn't feel out of place. And then they would just put less spice on what the dish I ate because my taste buds were not adjusted to it. So I don't really, I've been in a lot of different environments. Epilepsy, for example, has made people wonder how it is possible to exist in the ordinary world when you can just fall down and start shaking all of a sudden, and when you can't ever drive a car. And it means nothing to me. When you've had a blood removed from your brain, such that if you twist a little bit, you feel such extreme pain that it literally feels like a spike driven through your head. Stubbing your toe really doesn't matter.
Right. And I think, you know, part of the point is that some people have the, I'll use the word confidence. I don't know if that's even the right word, or the comfort in so many different situations, right? They seek out places like Eric was talking about, right? Where they seek out new experiences for themselves, and some people don't. And right, everybody's home background is different, you know, whether you were supported in trying new things or whether you weren't, you know. And so I think anything that we can do to try to help our students to take those chances, right? Right, we see that in all the stuff that we were talking about earlier today too, right? You know, are they willing to speak up and say what they're thinking in their group of 5 or with their lab partner? Or are they willing to be the ambassador if it's not something that you assign to go and talk to somebody else and ask a question? So there's just so many ways, I think, in which we as instructors get to help our students broaden their experiences. And sometimes that's looking out there and saying it's okay that everybody else around me doesn't look like me.
So I think this is great, and I'm glad that we ended up with this conversation, and I think it fits the theme of community and making sure that we are focused on trying to build strong communities in our classrooms, and recognize that as instructors, our job isn't exclusively teaching content, but it's also about building community in order to facilitate the larger growth of a field. So I'm glad we've reached to this point in our conversation, but it is now past our time. We usually try to say an hour, and now we've gone an hour and 15 minutes, which, to be honest, is what we do every week. So when this is actually nothing new, but nonetheless, I think we have reached our time. And I want to thank all of you, and thank Kathy for hosting and guiding our conversation. And I, once again, think it was wonderful. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and shout out to the 2 of you that I was in grad school with. Nice to see you too. Thanks for coming. And, you know, good to see familiar faces and people I haven't met yet. And I hope I see you all next week at the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Good luck, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
I'd like to know if somebody can also give me a reference regarding when people when students get angry at other students. I've been angry at what somebody does, but I've never been angry at a person. And I really have never been able to comprehend being angry at a person, because there's no way for me to understand that person's point of view, thus no way for me to judge whether the person is, shall we say, warrants anger, only what the individual action the person did. Yet I find that a lot of people talk about being angry at an individual, and I don't know how it works. I really have no way to comprehend how it would work. How does it work?
Well, I think that the best advice I can give you at this point is try to go look at the Step Up website. And not that that has all the answers, but it's a good start, because it's a concise resource that tries to lay out a lot of the issues that we were just talking about. It has the specific lessons that are very Step Up centric, but it also lists some other good articles and resources and things to read up on to try to understand this idea of identity.
Okay, when I had the Step Up guy come and talk to me, when I asked him such questions, he answered with just, well, you just know.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we're
never just known anything
in the ambassador training is to give people, our ambassadors, a better research base to understand what they're talking about and the literature that's been published about it. so that they can give more articulate answers to that question that you asked them. So in fact, we have our ambassador training session coming up this weekend. And that will be one of the biggest things that we try to instill, that we've changed over the years, is really trying to give the people that are out there being our spokespeople to really have that more rigorous understanding of the literature and the research, so they can provide more deep answers to questions to people.
I don't know, I think the best bit of advice I've heard lately about anything, especially dealing with things online, is just be kind. And just ask people to be kind to each other, and I think that's maybe key to the whole thing. But,
good way to say it. Thank you.
Our university president here, sort of one of the things that he he's pointed about maybe about 2 years now at this stage, and one of the first things he basically emphasized at the start is that everybody needs to be kind to everybody else. And if you do that, if as you're saying, you'll often get people, you don't know why they're acting the way they're acting. And you don't know what's behind it. Like, the teenage sons, and very often you make an innocuous comment and there's a flare up, and the reason for that is there's something else going on. So I suppose just be kind and just keep an eye out for people. Maybe, I don't know. That would be my take on it anyway.
I think Gary's suggestion of be kind is perfect. But if you want a broader description of what that means, the Step Up Everyday Actions Guide is a nice, concise, 5 steps that essentially equate to be kind.
Mm-hmm.
So I would take a look at that too.
Okay, and you said it was stepupwhat.org?
Stepupphysics.org.
Any spaces in there?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much for everything. It was a very interesting discussion for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.